Once again, I'm Julissa Fierro, and I will be talking to you about rurales. So rurales were first established by the Mexican president Benito Juarez to combat the banditry that threatened travel and commerce throughout Mexico. They are Federal Corps of Rural Police established on May 6, 1861, after being reconstituted under the Ministry of the Interior. The Mexican government had planned to use rurales 4 years after they were actually installed, but did not achieve to do so because of the War of Reform. When they were first established, rurales were charged with patrolling the highways and railways, assisting the army, guarding shipments of goods, and policing local elections. However, their powers were considerably enlarged under President Porfirio Diaz, who governed from 1876 to 1911. During this time, the rurales were tasked with escorting prisoners, guarding public buildings, intimidating political opponents, and acting as a kind of Praetorian Guard for the dictatorship. This resulted in the rurales acquiring a rather exaggerated reputation for oppression. By the end of Diaz's regime, the rurales numbered about 2,700 men and were eventually disbanded in 1914. In 1926, a new force, the Rural Defense Force, was created out of a number of volunteer forces that had developed after 1915 for local self-protection. Though this corps still exists as an army reserve, by the late 20th century it had been phased out, and its forces dropped from more than 100,000 in the early 1970s to fewer than 15,000 by the early 21st century. These volunteers do not receive pay, but are subject to being called in case of any national emergencies, much like the rurales were. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Francisco Cesada, and I will now be talking about the Plan de Ayala. So, one of the primary motivations for Emiliano Zapata was always land reforms for Morelos, as can be seen by the motto Tierra y Libertad, in which, the land was given back to Mexico. So, it was in October of 1910 that Francisco Madero would make his plan de San Luis Potosí. And this plan called for land reforms in Mexico. And so this motivated so many landless peasants to rise up against President Diaz. And it especially motivated Emiliano Zapata. And it was with Emiliano Zapata's help that Francisco Madero would prove victorious against President Diaz. And so President Diaz was exiled, and Francisco Madero became the new president of Mexico. But even though he proved a great leader during the revolution, Francisco Madero didn't keep his promises. And so Emiliano Zapata actually became enraged, and he called for the overthrow of Madero. And it was in November of 1911, while in hiding from Francisco Madero's army, where he gathered with other local leaders near Puebla in the mountains of Ayala, that they made their own declaration of principles, in which they wanted the Mexico they wanted. And so this declaration of principles would become known as the Plan de Ayala, Emiliano's Plan of Ayala. And so this plan called for the expropriation of the haciendas from their landowners to be given back to the landless peasants. And so this motivated so many landless peasants to rise up against their own hacendados and join the fight with Emiliano Zapata against President Madero. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Jasmine Guzman, and I'll be presenting over the Convention of Agua Caliente. The Convention of Agua Caliente was a major meeting that took place during the Mexican Revolution. That was between the factions in the Mexican Revolution that defeated Victoriano Huerta's federal army and forced his resignation and exile in July of 1914. The convention was intended to settle the differences among the Big Four, who played the biggest role in overthrowing Huerta, who were Pancho Villa, Emiliano Zapata, Venustiano Carranza, and Álvaro Obregón. A major question during the convention was whether participants would only be revolutionary military men or if they could include civilians as well. Carranza had a large and strong civilian backing and argued for their inclusion but lost. The tensions were high between Carranza and Villa, even though Carranza never had the support of the Southerns. Although Zapata was not openly sided with Villa initially, he was hostile to Carranza, with Carranza returning the feeling. However, the convention was dominated by the Villistas. The convention elected General Hilario Gutierrez Ortiz as President of the Republic for the limited term of 20 days. Villa was appointed commander of the Conventionalist Army, but due to the disagreements Carranza had with Zapata and Villa, the three refused to attend the convention, and little resulted.
Good afternoon. My name is Marcelo Ortana, and I'll be presenting on the death of Zapata. Emiliano Zapata, the great Mexican revolutionary, was tragically betrayed and ambushed on April 10, 1919, by federal forces after a heroic 9-year struggle to bring self-reliance and autonomy to his beloved people of Morelos. In 1917, Carranza's army defeated Pancho Villa, which left Zapata isolated. General Pablo González, who directed the government operations against Zapata, had Colonel Jesus Guajardo pretend to want to join the agrarians and have a secret meeting with Zapata at the hacienda of Chinameca in Morelos. There, Zapata was ambushed and shot by death by Carrancista soldiers. His body was carried to Cuautla and buried there. Zapata and his followers never gained control of the central Mexican government, but they did redistribute land and aided poor farmers within the territory of their control. Zapata's influence has long endured after his death, and his agrarian reform movement, known as Zapatismo, remains important to many Mexicans today. Thank you.
Good evening once again. My name is Francisco Saceda, and I will be talking about the legacy of the 1970 Constitution, which called for land reform. So, as I previously mentioned, land reform was always a major problem for Mexico. And so, the Article 27 was made in the 1970 Constitution to tackle this situation. So, Article 27 called for the expropriation of haciendados, of the haciendas, to be given back to the peasants. So this motivated so many landless peasants that had lost their land, right? And Article 27 also called for Mexico's right toward their own subsoil, which meant that they had the right toward their minerals, their water, and most importantly, oil. And this would actually cause major problems between Mexico and its own foreign investors. And so it's important to note that Article 27 actually got its motivations from Emiliano Zapata's own Plan de Ayala. And it's thanks to the Plan de Ayala that we have the land returned to the people. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, my name is Roxana, and I will be presenting about the Zapatistas. The Zapatistas was a group that was participating in the anti-globalization, and they struggled for democracy and land reform. And it was organized with the EZLN, which is the Zapatista National Liberation Front. And on 1st of January 1994, they wanted to declare war on the Mexican government, and then they demanded work, land, housing, food, democracy. And the primary goal of the Zapatistas was the land reform and distribution. They demanded greater political and cultural autonomy for the indigenous people and the rest of Mexico. Zapata and the Zapatistas' legacy, it still lives on.
Hi, once again, my name is Nicole Rios, and I'll be talking about the values of the murals. First, I'll be talking about the values that Diego Rivera intended on his murals. Diego Rivera integrates the revolutionary ideology with painting. Art must denounce the suffering of the people, and it must also contain the cultural roots of its identity. In Diego Rivera's murals, we can see a lot of indigenismo as one of his major Aztec and Mayans, the political, social statements of the Mexican history, and some of the current events during the time. For the sugar plantation, this was set on a sugar plantation. This mural introduces the tensions over labor, race, and economic inequity that's reared in Mexico during and after the revolution. In this panel, Rivera adapts Marxist ideas about class struggle, an understanding of history born in industrialized Europe, to the context of Mexico, a primarily agrarian country. For the agrarian leader, though Mexican and USA newspapers regularly vilified the revolutionary leader as a treacherous bandit, Rivera immortalized Zapata as a hero and glorified the victory of the revolution in an image of violent but just vengeance. In Liberation of the Peon, Rivera developed a painful narrative of corporal punishment. Here we can see a peon being punished by the hacendados and helped by the revolutionary soldiers. The mural offers injustice of earlier social and economic conditions as reason for the Mexican Revolution. Thank you.
Good evening once again. I'm Carlos Alvarez, and I'm going to be talking finally about the limitations that a mural has. So first off, we should acknowledge that Mexico has remained religious since the conquest. So if you guys have any Mexican ties, your nana, your tata, you may know how serious they take their religion. All three parts of the mural Diego Rivera painted have no religious symbolism within them. For example, there's no religious symbolism here, or there. However, an argument can be made that the body lying on the bottom of the Liberation of the Peon can be referred to Jesus Christ's body. Another limitation is due to Diego Rivera's ideology. Rivera himself was a communist, and many people in Mexico and the United States disagreed with his ideology. Therefore, they would not want to see the mural. I believe this is a small factor that contributes to the limitation as well. A third limitation could be where the mural was situated, which is in the MoMA Museum in New York. Diego Rivera wanted to spread the word to the United States about what the current situation in Mexico was, and therefore sent his artwork to the Museum of Art in New York. However, people in the US didn't really get the true meaning of the mural, and this was another limitation the mural had for Diego Rivera. The US citizens criticized non-citizens to do commissioned work because many of the artists in the US that were citizens were unemployed due to the Great Depression in 1929. And finally, another limitation can come from the causes from the Mexican Revolution. Nationalism, which meant Mexico for the Mexicans. Better labor conditions, political succession, and foreign interventions were all big factors that caused the Mexican Revolution. However, as you can see in the mural right here, none of them are shown. If someone wants to get a grasp on how the Mexican Revolution was like from these depictions, they may get a distorted view on how the revolution might have been. Also, Diego Rivera painted Zapata as an ordinary peasant, while he was more than a peasant. Thank you.
Thank you for your attention. Now we'll open the floor for any questions.
Any questions?
If you guys didn't understand the mural, we can explain as well. Any questions? So, thank you for your attention.
Muy bonito, muchachos, muy bonito. Muy bonito.
Thank you to Mr. Brandon who helped us in the presentation and making the mural.
Very proud of them. I'd like to say that we're going to have a movie coming out in the fall that you guys are all welcome to see. It's going to be about Zapata. So we've been working hard on that movie. It's been a Herculean task, an ordeal, if you will. But it's going to be great, as Trump would say, right? And the local history book will also be coming out in probably next year at the very beginning of the year too. And we're actually going to sell that book, and the proceeds of the book will go to these students' IB test to help pay for their IB test. So I hope you guys can all buy the book and help them further their education. Thanks a lot.